Okay, so that's the recording started, and as usual, that will be available both as part of the meeting chat, and I'll upload it to YouTube, the YouTube channel that we have, and I'll let you know when that's there too. Although you can do that yourself by going onto YouTube. What is it they say? Hit subscribe and the bell to be reminded when there are new videos. So it'll be within the next couple of days. It just takes a wee bit of time to download and reformat and that kind of stuff. Okay, so today I want to move on to the risk part of governance, risk and compliance. Hopefully you've all got into the swing of things now, in that you've gone ahead, you've looked at the presentation, you've looked at the materials. So remember, there's a whole pile of materials on a OneNote notebook, and that's linked from Teams. So if you look under module materials on Teams, it's also, of course, all on Moodle. The bit that's missing in the OneNote notebook is simply the quiz questions. But all the materials are there. So we have gone through governance, and now we're going on to risk. And hopefully you've read ahead, read the presentations, and read all of these pages here. So that today isn't so much me going over the material, it's not me presenting the material, it's going over it so that you can come in and ask any questions that you have from your reading of it in advance. Okay, so if nobody's got anything, what we'll do is we'll start. So we're starting with that risk management presentation. Or at least we will be starting with that risk management presentation once my computer catches up with itself. Okay, so the important thing to remember about risk is that we all take them. I went out to the shops yesterday for some milk. I took a risk crossing the road to get into my car. I took a risk driving to the supermarket. I took a risk going into the supermarket with my mask on. I took a risk that someone had actually pasteurized the milk when I drank it. We take risks all the time. The key is understanding them and minimizing them. So it's not that organizations shouldn't take risks. In fact, no organization can survive if it doesn't take risks. If a retailer doesn't open new shops, well, opening a new shop is a risk, but if you don't open a new shop, you don't bring in money, you don't grow. So organizations take risks all the time. That's exactly the same as us in our real lives. But what we try and do with risk is minimize the uncertainty. So we try and understand what the risks are, what could happen, what the possible consequences are. So we figure out what the risks are and then we manage them in the same way as I did this morning. So when I crossed the road to my car, I checked the road. I looked left, I looked right, I looked left again. I checked that there was nothing coming before I crossed the road to minimize that risk whilst doing so. Because road accidents are a huge risk. 5 years ago, there were over 181,000 of them in the UK. Almost 1,800 of those caused fatalities. And for you guys, anybody, any adult under 30, it's the biggest cause of death. So we know that there's a risk. We've identified the risk. The question is, what do we do about it? Now, we could just say, not having that, I'm never going to leave the house again. In fact, I'm just going to stay in my bed. Now, judging by the attendance this morning, that's a strategy that several of the class have employed, but it's not a practical long-term one. So we can try other ways. Instead of avoiding the risk, we can educate people about the risks. That's been happening for a long, long time. When I was small, let me rephrase that. When I was small, I heard about something called the Tufty Club. The Tufty Club was a road traffic education series of adverts on television. So this was how people were educated about crossing the road in the mid-70s.
This is what happened one day when the ice cream van stopped by Tufty's house. Ice cream! And Tufty goes to find his mummy. Tufty always asks his mummy to go with him to the ice cream van. But Willie Weasel has gone off to get an ice cream by himself. Oh, dear! Oh, Mummy! Willie has been knocked down by a car. Now Willie has been hurt. And all because he didn't ask his mummy to go with him to the ice cream van. When you want to go to the ice cream van, always take Mummy with you.
Okay, so always take Mummy with you when you leave the house. The production values. Well, I don't want you to go to the next video. Thank you for asking. Yeah, when you want to go to the ice cream van, always take Mummy with you. Is a lesson from that advert, and I think we'll all agree that the production values are quite impressive. So these are the kinds of things that children are told. I mean, it's not all Tufty Club, there's other ones. After the Tufty Club, they moved to a superhero called the Green Cross Code Man. Played, as it happens, by the same man. Well, actually, watch this and you can tell me who this guy played.
Hi there. Uh-oh, this looks dangerous. Will they see that car? Think I better have a word with those two. That wasn't very clever, was it? If you'd been looking and listening all the way across, that wouldn't have happened. That's better. Remember, always use the Green Cross code, because I won't be there when you cross the road.
Okay, who knows?
Hi there. Uh-oh.
Who knows who he played in a famous film? Anybody? You've just been watching Darth Vader. And actually, just like in the Star Wars films, they dubbed him for the Green Cross Code Man as well, because he had a Bristol accent that made him sound like a farmer. So he was dubbed for Darth Vader, and he was even dubbed for the Green Cross Code Man. Poor Dave Prowse. Those are fairly gentle ways of doing it. As we've moved on, the approach has been slightly more hard-hitting.
There's a party going on right here.
A celebration to last throughout the years.
So bring your good times and your laughter too.
We're gonna celebrate your party with you. Come on now. Celebration. We gonna celebrate
And have a good time.
celebration.
We're gonna celebrate and have a good
So, quite a difference from Tufty Club to Think. But it's to try and address the risk and educate people about the risk and what they can do. And that's this in the same vein as organisations. Organisations have a few options about how they approach risk. Yes, you have to identify it, you have to figure out what the risks are and understand what the outcomes might possibly be. But the tricky part's doing something about that risk and trying to understand how you can manage it to minimise that risk. So there's lots of different ways that organisations do it. So we're going to cover 5, and that's the 5 that you can see on the slide there. These are reasonable approaches. These are fairly common approaches, but they're not the only approaches. So you will see other organisations, other ways of doing this. But as I say, these are reasonable. And the first reasonable approach is just to accept it. It's back to the how do we cope with the possibility that something might happen if we cross the road. Well, we could just not cross the road, we could just not leave the house, but sometimes you can't do that. You have to just go on with it. Of course, the possible outcome for incorrectly crossing the road can be quite tricky. Most risks that are simply accepted are small risks. Now, small is in itself quite a loaded term. If the Apple Store lose £20, it's very small in terms of amount so that they bring in. If your local newsagent loses £20, that's quite large in proportion to what they bring in. And if somebody on Universal Credit loses £20, that's devastating in terms of their finances. So small is very much a movable feast and has to be understood in terms of what you're doing, in terms of you, your organisation. And it's also in terms of what the risk might be. I mean, I was talking about money there, but it could be time. There might be a small risk that your servers could be hijacked, but the potential outcome could be devastating. So small risk, but it would take a lot of time, a lot of money and a lot of effort to compensate for that. So you possibly wouldn't want to accept that risk even though it's small. So it's about understanding which risks you accept and which ones you don't. There is a small risk that you or your building could get hit by a meteor. I don't have insurance for a meteor hitting my house, I have to say, because the chances of it happening are very small. On the other hand, if I worked on the International Space Station, I very much want to know what the impact might be if a meteor hits me. So they work it out, and you see the diagram there for what happens if there's an impact in certain parts of the International Space Station. Some of them, none whatsoever, so all the bits in grey. All the way through to the bright red ones, where there's a potential loss of oxygen, potential exposure to space, that kind of stuff. So you work in the space station, probably want to worry about meteor risks. Being a good boy that goes along with your master to the shops, don't need to worry about it. You can take the helmet off, you'll be fine. So you have to work out and understand the potential for risks. So that's acceptance. Anybody get any questions about that before we move on to the next one? Okay, the next one then is avoidance. Avoid the risk. Don't take the risk. Do everything you can to make sure that risk doesn't happen. If you have finance staff, most organisations have a financial year that runs from the 1st of April to the end of March the following year. Giving time off to your finance staff in March, just as the annual accounts are being prepared, is a huge risk that should not be taken. So you simply say, no, we're going to avoid that risk. If you work in finance, you can't take time off in March. Live with it. If it's possible, don't take the risk. If what could happen is always negative and you don't have to do it, don't. If, on the other hand, you do have to take the risk sometime, perhaps you could transfer them. I mentioned earlier that I have insurance in my house because if something happened to my house, I couldn't afford to rebuild it. But insurance companies who understand risk and have massive models for risk say to us, look, we know that you can't rebuild your house on your own, but how about 100,000 of us get together, we each put some money into the pot, and for the two people whose houses out of that 100,000, for those two people whose houses burn down, all the money that you've put in will go to those two people, and they'll be able to rebuild the house. So we're transferring risk. We're paying for someone else to take the risk for us. Or in insurance's case, we're paying for tens or hundreds of thousands of other people to take the risk for us. That's really easy when you can put a number on it. So I could go to a builder and say, here's my house, how much would you charge to build this again? Looking around my house, I'm guessing the answer is about 60, possibly £70 at least. But I have a number. And from that number, we can start to put some models together that allow us to insure that risk, along with lots of other people. But if the outcome is less clear, as I say, it's dead easy to figure out how much it would cost to build a house. How much does it cost to build a resilient cyber structure? Can you even define resilient? Well, at some point you're going to have to, and at some point you're going to say, yeah, we need to do this, this, and this. It would be nice to do this, this, and this. And if we were doing everything, we'll also do this, this, and this. And at some point, you're going to present that plan to whoever you work for, and they'll go, so we need to do this. And you'll say yes. And they'll go, right, well, if you absolutely must, here's the cash. This, we don't need to do, but it would be nice. That's right. yeah, let's not do that. You're going to have to fight to transfer the risk from a cost now to a cost later, because people don't think about it later. It's all very well you writing the report saying, well, if somebody hijacks our server, this is what happens. But until you've been in that position, until you've had the example of someone taking your server, holding it to ransom, it doesn't compute to a lot of people. A house burning down does, because they've seen that. Somebody hijacking your server, no. So sometimes you have to be really clear to people what this is going to cost in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of disruption. And how do you precisely determine the disruption? How do you put a number on, oh yeah, well, we didn't have the server, so 10 people couldn't log in and they couldn't do this. Okay, well, that's one number, so 10 people and you're paying them £100 a day, that's £1,000 a day that you're losing. Well, yeah, but that's only part of it, because what if they were the people that are on the phone to your customer? What if they were going to buy something from you? Or what if they needed your help from something they've already bought? So you either lose money because you haven't sold something, or you lose reputation because you haven't supported them properly. Putting the figure on it can be hard. That's why there's people like you to sit there and say, yeah, it will do this. It will take this amount. And that's why you need to understand the business as well as just your cybersecurity stuff. Because it's all very well saying, oh yeah, give me £1 million and I'll give you a secure server, but it's not going to happen a lot of the time. So you need to understand the business, you need to understand where the risks are, what the worst ones are, and where to direct your resources. Because it's all very well saying, oh well, we'll just insure if something goes wrong. But will that make up for it? If you lose your business, is there any money coming back that can make up for that? So that's transfer. Next option is to mitigate. So understanding that there is a risk, understanding the potential outcomes, and coming up with approaches that will mitigate, that will minimize the risk and the potential outcomes as much as possible. So I'll go back to the supermarket where I bought my milk again. The supermarket has somebody on the door, and he's got a nice wee peak cap, and he watches people coming in and out. So if I wandered up to the TV aisle and tried to wander out with a 50-inch TV without paying for it, there's a fair chance he'd notice. So that's one mitigation that they put in place, just somebody standing there. They've actually done some research. Have you ever been into any of these shops where they have cardboard cutouts of police? They're not just for fun. Actually, just having the cardboard cutout of a policeman will stop people stealing so much. So that's why when you go into a place like, I don't know, Home Bargains or something, they've got the cardboard cutout in the window. It just reminds people that there are consequences, so they tend not to steal. Anyway, the real life security guard would probably see me with a TV, but what if it was a £200 mobile phone that could fit in my pocket? Well, if I just wander up to the aisle, slip it in my pocket and saunter past him, chances are I'd never notice. So we probably want to mitigate that, and that can be done because beside the security guard are two big metal arches, and they're not just to stop you hitting the door with your trolley, they have an electromagnetic field, and inside that mobile phone is a tag. And if I disrupt that electromagnetic field with a tag, the alarm's going off. You've all heard it in shops, because people genuinely buy something and the staff forget or don't completely nullify the tag, so that when you walk through you get embarrassed and it rings at you. So if we've got that technology, why isn't it on everything? Well, is it worth it? There's a cost for those tags. Should I go and put it on a tin of peas that costs 15 pence? Probably not. So I could probably wander into the supermarket, slip a small tin of peas into my pocket, saunter out, and no do be any the wiser. And plenty of people do. And supermarkets take that risk for the smaller items, but not for the bigger items. So they mitigate where they can. You'll do exactly the same. You will mitigate the risk. If you have a server, there's different approaches that you can take to hardware failure. You could have some bits kicking about, some spare hard drives and power supplies and all that kind of stuff. And if something happens, you say, oops, sorry, server's down. Just let me get my toolkit. Give me an hour to fix it, and give me a half hour to restore the backup, and you'll be good to go. For some organizations, that might be okay. For some organizations, they might just go in and say, yeah, okay, we'll do other stuff then. But for other organizations that are reliant on the server, that might not be feasible. So instead of having parts, you might have a whole replacement server sitting there. And if anything goes wrong, you swap out the server for the one for the other. There's still time involved, so instead of half a day, it might be an hour. Just to unplug the old server, plug in the new server, connect up any storage devices, routers, all the rest of the stuff that you would have to connect, and boot it up again. An hour's not bad. You might think that's okay, and again, for an awful lot of organizations, an hour is fantastic. But it depends on your organization. If you wander up to your bank and try and get some money out, and you can't get any money out because their server's down for an hour, there's going to be an awful lot of people very unhappy. So organizations like banks don't just have bits to fix servers or replacement servers, they have duplicate servers that run at the same time. BT, for example, have multi-million pound mainframes sitting in their headquarters in London. And they have an identical multi-million pound mainframe sitting 100 miles away in another data center doing exactly the same stuff. Because, of course, if their server goes down and they can't take note of people making calls, for every second they're down, they lose thousands of pounds. And we want to take a guess at how long it takes BT to swap from the main server to the backup server. Is there anybody out there?
Yes, I was also want to mention that what happened a couple of days ago to Facebook. Their servers was done at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they managed to get it back. It's 9:30 at night. but still, like didn't have any access till next day in the morning. And they say that some of the in staff actually try to upload, like some server, but it's like they messed up with the stuff. So that's why it's like 5 hours of knockdown was.
That's right. Of course, that wasn't actually the server that went down. Anyone know what it was that went down?
They say it's like somebody plugged off the like whole system from the Facebook, and that's why it's like plugged off. It doesn't have any connection to the internet whatsoever, and servers couldn't find. I think it's called BCG. That's like a main server that actually connects the companies to the network.
There's a couple of things. There's one called DNS, which is the domain name server, and that's what links you typing in bbc.co.uk to the IP address of your server. And there's another one called Border Gateway Protocol. Might have slightly got that wrong, but it's something that's certainly
Yes,
those lines.
yes, that's the one I meant earlier.
And that's the one that says, well, if you're going to the BBC server, which route should you take through the internet? What Facebook had done was they had reconfigured their servers for internet traffic and basically said, by the way, rest of the internet, we don't exist anymore. So if any traffic comes for us, just ignore it. We don't care about it. And the rest of the internet went, fine, no problem, see ya. So the servers were there. The servers were working. The servers didn't go down. But all their routing, all their connections, they all disappeared. Interestingly, part of the reason it took so long to come back up is that Facebook use, it's like an internal version of Facebook just for their staff. So when everybody wanted to figure out what was going on, they couldn't talk to each other because their own internal Facebook was down as well. So none of the engineers could figure out what was going on. They couldn't talk to any other engineer to figure out what was going on. So they did what any good engineer would do, and they ran to the server to figure out what was going on. Anybody know what happened at that point? Anybody? As well as running all their internal servers and all their internal support on their internal Facebook, they also ran all their internal security. So all those engineers who ran to the server found that they couldn't get in because none of their access cards worked, because the access devices couldn't access the server to identify them. So they were locked out as well. It's a case study in how not to do it, because that failed in so many levels. Having all your systems in one place, public facing, internal, security, all of them running in one place, that's a fail. Being unable to quickly react to downtime, that's a massive fail. Allowing someone to push an update without it being checked is another fail. So in terms of cybersecurity, that is awful. In terms of governance, it's terrible, because who was in charge of ensuring that their whole business didn't go down? And in terms of risk, it's clearly a bad one. And no one had identified that risk and thought, well, what if? And that's what this whole risk management thing is. It's people sitting, chewing on a pencil going, what if? Partly it's experience and understanding and things that have happened before, so you can plan a wee bit better for those. People's houses have burned down before, so I can plan a wee bit better. But where it's a new system, where it's a new organisation, where you're implementing new things, it's about you sitting there and going, yeah, let's figure this out. What could go wrong and what would we do about it? Facebook clearly hadn't done that to a proper extent because there were multiple failures. Failures with the update rollout, failure to separate systems, and a failure to ensure that a response could be made. So you're quite right, that's a great example just recently. However, you're not going to deflect me from my question, which was, how long do you think it would take for BT to switch to a backup server in the case of, say, a fire at their data center? The poll's up on screen. What do you think? Remember, this is a multi-million-pound server serving every customer that BT has. Commercial, domestic, internet, everything. You do know how polls work, yeah? You choose an option and you say submit. Oh, 2 of you worked it out. That's good.
I think it's like when the server is down, all the companies has a 10 millisecond rule, and if the server didn't back up itself and start again, they actually try to look for the problem to solve it.
Well, you always look for the problem, try to solve it. The difficulty is that takes time, and for an organisation where time equals money, the longer you take to find it and solve it, the more money you lose. Which is why the 2 of you that responded are correct. It takes a millisecond to switch to the backup server. A millisecond for every customer, every account, everything that BT have, 1 millisecond. One server goes down, within 1 millisecond the new one starts. Which one of you voted 1 second just after I told you it was 1 millisecond? Maybe it's just took longer to come through to my screen. So, people put into effect all of these kinds of mitigations. Of course, they don't always work. There's a bank in Glasgow that shall remain nameless who put in something called a tandem system. A tandem system is it's 1 box but 2 servers. So everything's replicated. You've basically got 2 of everything, 2 CPUs, 2 sets of memory, 2 sets of storage. Everything's duplicated all in 1 box. So anything that comes in, if anything goes wrong, it immediately switches to the backup server. Hence the tandem, it's 2. So this bank bought this incredibly expensive piece of hardware, set it up, and it all worked swimmingly for about 2.5 years, 3 years. At which point the server went down and the backup server did not kick in. Clearly a big problem. The bank's services were down for a long time. Anybody want to speculate about what happened? Is there anybody out there? Okay, seeing as how everybody's still asleep this morning, I'll just tell you. The system worked perfectly. When the server failed, the backup server came on immediately. Everything worked exactly as it should. Everything except the Meteor. Because when they checked it, they found out that what had failed after 2.5 years wasn't the main server, it was the backup server. The main server had failed approximately 20 seconds after they'd turned it on. And the message that it had failed had got lost in amongst all the startup messages. No one noticed that it had failed, so no one did anything about it. No one checked it. No one thought, everything's still okay here. So the backup server ran for 2.5 years and then it failed too. They made some changes after that. So how you approach it is entirely down to the organisation. It's to do with the funding, it's to do with what might happen. You make a calculation. You figure out how much it costs to mitigate against the cost of what could possibly happen. So for BT, it's worth it to replicate a multi-million-pound computer system and all the data centre and the staff and all the rest of it. Because if it goes down even for a second, it will lose a fortune. Banks are in the same sort of situation. Your local corner shop isn't. They're happy to wait a day to come back up. And it's finding that balance between the cost of mitigating and the outcome that will decide whether you have a stock of spare parts or you have a replacement server or you have two servers going at the same time. And you'll see this quite often in support contracts. So people will sign support contracts that say that, yes, we'll fix it within a week, or we'll fix it within a day, or we'll fix it within a half a day, or we'll fix it within an hour. Not surprisingly, the faster you want it fixed, the more your support contract will cost you. So those calculations made all the time, the amount of risk you're willing to accept against the cost of mitigating it. The final one of these 5 is exploitation. We've already said that you have to take risks, but actually that's a broader case for some types of organisation. I'm sitting here with 2 jags in my arm against COVID. Now, the vaccine that I got was simply the last in a long line of attempts that they'd made to come up with a vaccine. Now, that's clearly pertinent for now, but it's also how drug companies work. They want to come up with new drugs because they want to sell their drugs. But you don't just go, yep, we'll have a new drug, please, and you're there. You have to figure out what you're trying to achieve. You have to figure out if that's going to cause any problems. There was a drug in the early 60s called thalidomide. which is still used because it can still have highly beneficial effects, unless you're pregnant at the time, in which case it can cause deformities in your baby. And they didn't realise that at the time. So companies put exploitation into their business plan. We are going to try to make new drugs. And we recognise that some of those drugs won't work. And in fact, some of the drugs may actually cause harm. The first person that did a heart transplant, the patient died very, very quickly. But they kept going because creating heart transplants and understanding how to do them can save a lot of lives. So again, it's about balancing that risk and the reward. Do you just say, nope, something bad might happen while we're doing this? Or do you say, no, we know that something bad will happen, but the outcome is worth it? It's a utilitarian approach to risk. And sometimes these things can take ages. There's all sorts of conspiracy theories going around that there's no way that people could come up with a vaccine and test it within a year. Well, actually there is. The reason we can't do that normally is that we don't throw enough time, energy, resources at them. But people were very motivated to find a vaccine for COVID. So lots of labs, lots of people, lots of organisations, lots of companies, lots of universities, all got given lots of money to go and find a vaccine. Where there is less urgency, it can take a lot longer. In the news just yesterday was the fact that we now have a vaccine for malaria. It's only taken us 100 years. And why don't we have one before? Well, not to put too fine a point on it, there wasn't the urgency. There wasn't the payback. The sorts of countries where people get malaria most tend to be poor countries. So the drug companies didn't see a reason to put money into that. The organisations in those countries, the governments in those countries didn't have the money to do it. But people worked away at it anyway, and after 100 years we finally get a vaccine. So people deliberately take risks to find out what happens. And when they do that, they can have favourable outcomes. Okay, so that's 5 approaches to risk. As I said, there are others. And none of them are wrong, it's just different approaches for different organisations to achieve different outcomes. Anybody got any questions before we move on? Okay. There's no point identifying the risk. There's no point figuring out what it is unless you actually write it down somewhere and tell other people about it. So we have what are called risk management plans, sometimes called risk registers. And it's really simple. It's a list of things that we've identified, things that we're doing to stop it, and what could happen. There's an example. So the risk register says what the risk is, puts them into different categories, defines a probability, how likely is it to happen, what's the impact, and that could be in days, it could be in hours, it could be in pounds, it could be in whatever is appropriate for this, how much extra work it will cause. So it's not just the fact that it's happened, it's extra stuff. And do we have a response? What would happen if we made a mistake with the plan? Well, it would do this and this and this, oh, and look, this one's actually occurred. So we can figure out what it did cost us and put it against what we expected. And you can see there the estimated impact was 10,000, the actual impact was 10,800. So it was a decent estimate. So we have risk registers where you identify, analyse and figure out what you're going to do about any of these risks. And you should know that because, of course, that's one of the items that you have to create for your assessment. Any questions about that?
The risk assessment for the report, is it kind of like table that is like identify all the risks and giving them a number is like most likely, least likely, and could cause a problem for the company or could cause a problem, like financially or lawfully?
It is all of those things. Now, the thing you saw on the screen there, that's a very simple risk register. And there's no, this is how you create a risk register. So, for example, on OneNote, you'll find a risk register page. Your computer, I assume, will be much faster than mine. So your risk register page will come up much more quickly. So, like I said, it says what should be in a risk register, but organisations will take different approaches depending on what the organisation is, depending on what it is they're doing, depending on the type of risk that they might see. So there's a few examples there. So the first one is about a treasury management and risk document. Now the clue's in the name, it's about finance. Treasury, so it's about finance. So their document talks very much about financial risks. Okay, so this document says you can go and look at it, and if you go through all the rest of the stuff, because this is all the governance stuff, all of this thing would all go to the board. So this is a report to the board talking about the risks so that those involved in governance are well aware of the risks and can understand what the potential outcomes are. And in this particular case, that starts on page 24. And you can see there's the risk register starting there. Now, there's slightly fewer columns than the one you saw in the presentation there. There's still a title and a description, but in this case, it gives us a consequence. What will happen if? There's a risk that a bank won't meet its contractual obligations. And you'll remember that actually happened 10, 15 years ago. Remember, banks went bust. Well, what happens if you had money in that bank? Well, you might not get it back. So they're saying what they do about it. They have credit criteria. So if you set up Tony's bank and say, hey, deposit all your money with me, they might politely decline on the basis that it's not worth it. So they will deposit money in places where they are comfortable. And they use something
I
called
think some of the people who, you know, like those banks is bankrupted. I think one of them was BlackRock or something. And what happened was, like, I think under 30 grand or under 50 grand, they actually get their money back. But that's why after that, people start putting half of the money in one bank, half of the money in the other bank, to make sure that as long as it was like they are on the criteria, they can get their money back.
You're partly right. There is a banking code, and if you set up a bank, you're protected under that. So as an individual, if you have up to a certain amount, and that amount changes, I think it's even up as high as 70 now, but we'll stick with the 50 that you were talking about. If you have up to £50,000 in the bank and the bank goes bust, it's kind of like the insurance that I was talking about. So all of the banks kick in, and the government actually, so you will get your money back. But that's only as an individual. The same protection doesn't extend to organisations. So there's a bigger risk for the organisation than it is for the individual. But you're also quite right in that, just as individuals do, organisations will switch money. They'll keep money in different places and not just put all their eggs in one basket. There's a reason that expression exists.
Same thing, you know, like happened in the British home stores when they got bankrupted, and they didn't actually pay the workers' pensions towards their payment, and nobody able to get their money back, even towards from the insurance as well.
And some of their directors were prosecuted because not being able to pay a pension is a risk and should have been on the Treasury risk register, and it turns out that it was, and that the board ignored that risk and didn't do enough to ensure that people got their pensions. I can't remember if there were prosecutions, but there were certainly fines. And this is part of what I was talking about.
I don't remember as well, but I think there was
Yeah,
you know, like they charged them, but they couldn't be able to pay for it.
yeah.
But still, they, I think, get away with it.
And this is part of what I was talking about in terms of governance. It is a legal obligation that you have. If you sit on the board of directors, for example, you have a legal obligation. And you can't just go, oh, well, I didn't fully understand it. If you didn't fully understand it, you shouldn't have been on the board. Because organisations don't have that protection, this status here is set at amber. And I'll say more about status, but amber's fairly clear. It's just like a traffic light system. Red, amber, green. And because it can't be properly mitigated against, because a bank could go out of business, it's amber. We're doing everything we can, but there's still a risk there. The next one, on the other hand, is about liquidity. Do we have enough cash on hand to pay our people, to pay our suppliers? And yeah, they've put stuff in place to ensure that there's a cash flow forecasting model. They understand well how these things work. So that's green. They're not worried about it. So they've got items, what might happen and what they're doing about it, and a quick overview of whether they think it's a big problem or not. So that's the RAG system that they're using. Red, amber, green, to decide whether or not they're okay with the risk status. The next risk register that you've got an example of uses a slightly different format. So the first one was only about finance. This one is grouped by function. So the first one is also finance, and they have the same sorts of headings, what the risk is, what could happen, and what we're doing about it. But they've put it under the different headings of what they do. So it's finance, there's inequalities, there's people in transformation, community capacity building. So all that, they've put them into different categories to understand where the issues are in the different categories. But we'll stick with this financial one. And they've done something slightly more detailed than a simple red, amber, green. They've used something called a risk matrix, which is this thing over here. You assign a value for impact and a value for likelihood. So in this particular case, the likelihood that the council will have to take difficult and challenging decisions because they don't have enough money to do everything they want to do is 5 out of 5. It will happen. And the impact that will have on council services is a 4 out of 5. So you go along, 4 and a 5 takes you there. So the least amount of impact is down the bottom left-hand corner here, the most in the top right. So it gives a risk score. So you multiply the 4 by the 5 and you get a 20. So there's a visual representation, there's a numeric representation, and actually this one also uses a variation of red, amber, green, albeit that there's 2 different colours of amber. So it's the same idea, but slightly more detailed, slightly more nuanced in terms of its approach. Because it uses this risk matrix instead of a simple RAG system. And some systems actually assign the description. So what impact would it be? Minor, moderate, and so on. What is the likelihood? All the way up to almost certain. So that's the second example of a risk register. The third one is from the IJB that we looked at before. And again, because this was a new organisation and it took staff from both councils and health boards, they actually decided to say, okay, if you're new to this, here's how we're running our risk register. And it actually tells you in the document what they're doing and why. And in this case, it's actually a legislative, it's a compliance issue as well. The risk register is a requirement of the clinical and care governance framework. So here we've got governance, risk and compliance all coming together. It's the governance framework, it's a risk register, and you would be in non-compliance with the legislation if you didn't do it. So they're saying why they're doing it. They have brought to the front of the report some of the risks identified, but they use yet another different format. Sorry, I thought I'd taken a note of where that started, but I haven't, so just give me a second to find it in the document. Okay, so they've used a slightly different format. Same idea, the title, description, what could happen, what you're doing to stop it happening. But it also gives a manager. It says, this person here is responsible for managing this risk. Any questions? Ask them. They also use a version of the 5x5 matrix, but they don't show the matrix. They just do the 5x3, they give you a number, tell you whether it's high, medium or low, and again, use red, amber, green. So again, it's a different, same kind of idea, but slightly different. And they've also broken that down. So this one is about the financial risk is high, the patient risk is moderate, and the publicity risk is also moderate. Financial risk here, high. Patient outcome risk, 8, moderate. Publicity, 9, moderate. Okay, so they're doing the same sorts of things. Possibility, so the likelihood of it happening, the possibility of the outcome, they're assigning a number, they're also using red, amber, green, but they're not showing the matrix this time. But they still are showing what the problem is, what could happen, all that kind of stuff. And they're also saying who set up this risk register, who did it, and when. So if anybody has any questions, they phone up this person and go, all right, okay, so can you just take me through why you made this decision, why you thought this was the correct result? So that's the third example. Same kind of general outcome, but presented in a different way. And the fourth example goes even further. So it has ownership, potential risk, cause, potential effect. It has the risk matrix. It has the mitigations, but it also adds in these things here. So as well as having red, amber, green, it adds in a completed and a not yet started. But it's still the same kind of idea. Who owns it? What the potential risk is? What the cause might be? What might happen if that happens? What the mitigations are in place to stop it happening? There's your risk score. And then specific mitigations, so specific actions that they're going to take, are all listed and their status is clearly showing. Yeah, this is progressing. Not only is it progressing, we're about 70% done with that, although the word there is same. So we're 70% through, but that has stayed the same since our last risk report, because a risk report, a risk register, isn't something you do once and put in a drawer. It's something you revisit and keep up to date on. The next one is also in progression. We're at 25%, but we've done better. We've actually moved on this one. Last time you heard about this, we'd only done 10% of it. Now we've done a quarter of it. So each of the actions is shown. And even when they're complete, we'll leave them in there to say, yeah, we were going to do this and we have done it. Yay us. This one, now we're worried about this one. It's not happening. We've hardly done any of it. We really should be taking a note of this. This one's okay because we're doing it. We know it's there and it is progressing. This one was kind of stalled a bit worried about this one. I'm trying to find one where they're really worried and it's in red. This one they haven't started. And they hadn't started it last time either. So if I was in governance at that point, I would say, look, we've identified this. It was here last time, but you've not done anything about it. Why not? That would be a question I'd be asking at the board. And right at the end, it says how it's set out, what they mean, and how to read all the keys. I do actually have an issue with this one, and the issue I have is this thing here. They've assigned colours for each of their areas. Political, economic, social, and all that kind of stuff, which is a good idea, But if I'm scrolling down a risk register and I, having been used to seeing things in red, meaning there's a problem, or seeing things in amber, meaning I should worry about them, I see this and I think, oh, what's the problem here? And then I realise, well, actually, it's not a problem. They've just made this the yellow ones. And the other purple ones. But even knowing that, I get to the red and I go, oh, what's up here? What's that? And then I realise, no, it's not something I need to worry about. It's just red is their health theme. So if I was advising them, I'd tell them to change that. So that was a long way around telling you there's a whole load of ways of setting these up. There is no, this is how you do it. So what you have to do is figure out your set of risks. And that's what I want you to do right now. Figure out what those risks are, particularly where there's IT involved, but don't limit yourself to IT. Figure out what the approaches are, figure out what the mitigations are. So the same sort of headings that you saw on those examples there, and how you're going to manage that risk, taking into account the ones that I've spoken about today, how you're going to mitigate them or transfer them or ignore them, whatever it's going to be. And you'll probably want to consider all those things that are in the last set of bullet points. Who is it? What is it? Why is it? But a lot of other things as well. So that's the tutorial that I want you to do based on your case study. Okay, so go back to the case study, read about the organisation and think about these things in context of that organisation. Any other questions or comments? No. Okay, let me just stop the recording.